My name is Joyce, and I am indeed an alcoholic. And I am so grateful for the privilege to be able to share my experience in recovery. I happen to be, I think, the eldest person in the room. And I remember asking an old-timer once, when do I get to be an old-timer? He says, well, you keep coming back, you don't drink, and you don't die. So here I am. I had a lot to learn. I always consider myself among my relatives because I relate to alcoholics. You're my salvation, so to speak, to keep me from taking the next drink. My family is my blood. I don't relate to all of them. In fact, I don't relate to my husband of 62 years. Someone asked him one time why he didn't drink alcohol. He can drink alcohol with impunity. For me, there were always consequences and repercussions. And he said, I'm glad you're sitting down. He said, I don't drink alcohol because I don't like the way it makes me feel. I don't understand that. So how would I explain to this man about a spiritual malady, that how spiritually diseased I was when I got here, because I didn't even understand it at the time. I was always going, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? And I clearly know the first step, alcohol is simply a power greater than I am. I didn't have any problem with a power greater than I am. Because if I pick up that drink after this meeting, my life will become unmanageable by me. But look who I'm telling. Because I could never stop abruptly. Never happened. I never drank all I wanted. I drank all I could. I had so much to learn, and I heard a metaphor that keeps me grounded. And it was the safest sheep are in the middle of the flock. And I think metaphorically of my alcoholism circling the flock, waiting for me to go off in another direction or to lag behind, to pounce on me. So I try to stay in the middle of the flock who are seeking serenity and sobriety. My home group today is the Aberdeen High Nooners Fellowship. I don't drive at night anymore. I have a fear of falling, so I don't go out after dark. Thank you, Fred, for the ride to the meeting. I live across the street. This place has so much to do with my getting sober, and I'll get into that. But all I want to say, I'm not going to go into a long drunk-a-log. I just want to say I picked up my first drink of vodka after the prom at age 17, a high school prom, and my date, people used to date, called it a screwdriver. I understand today it was vodka and orange juice. That was the best orange juice I had ever had. And every nerve in my body went, wow, this is great. It was like finding the elixir of life. I did not make it home that night. My life became unmanageable. I went home with a friend, Linda, and I remember hearing her mother call my mother on the phone and say, you know, I think it was something Joyce ate because she's very sick. So I learned at 17 that people will make excuses for us. So what did I pledge that I would never do again after that night? I pledged that I would never drink that much again. But look who I'm telling. I had my first drink when I was 49 years old. I was born in 1940. Let's just put that out there. So I was 49 years old. I don't remember my last drink that night because my life became unmanageable. What I'd like to do is just hit a few things that should have warned me, or at least let me acknowledge that I might be an alcoholic. I want you to know that when I hit that bottom, I was a low bottom drunk spiritually. My life was over. I hated everybody in my life, especially myself. And I had all sweet relationships were dead, and I had killed them. But I remembered being in that place where I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go, but I knew my life was over. Alcohol did not work for me anymore. I couldn't live with it, and I could not live without it. I lived in Lima. I'm going to talk about the 1980s briefly. I lived in Lima, Peru a couple of years, and I studied Spanish at the Language Institute. So I went in one morning at 8 o'clock. I had not had a drink to take a written exam. And I remember when they passed out the exam, I had to write my name in the right corner of the exam. I could not write my name on the paper. My hand was shaking. I held onto my wrist. I had to excuse myself because I could not write my name. I didn't understand anything about delirium tremens or DTs or whatever you call it. I didn't know anything about that. So I went down to my car, excused myself. I told the professor I'll have to do a makeup exam. I'm a test taker. The exam didn't make me nervous. I was prepared. But I'm sitting in my car, 8 o'clock in the morning, reaching under the seat to get a flask and taking a couple of hits of vodka so I could drive home. That should have been a clue, right? After I got to AA, I had heard a speaker named Clancy, and he said this, I'll never forget it. He said, drinking alcohol for alcoholics is like a mild psychosis because it will alter our perception of reality. He said it's also a self-induced form of temporary amnesia. I was a blackout drinker, and I can tell you how I could go back into my drinking days and remember how I experienced those in one night. I lived in Miami, and I was in commission sales, and I went to an award dinner. I was really proud of myself. This little North Carolina, I grew up in Graham, hour and a half north, Alamance County. That's I could spend 2 hours talking about alcohol up there, or the lack of it. We used to have to go to Virginia to even buy it. Nevertheless, that night I went to the Grand Bay Hotel, and I had really arrived, and I was so proud of myself. And after the dinner in Miami, we went to the cocktail lounge. That was perfectly normal for me, and I had no idea who was buying the drinks, or I didn't care. Now, my perception of reality when I went down on the elevator is that I could get into my car and drive it. The Florida Highway Patrol disagreed. I came out of a blackout. Now, I knew Miami like the back of my hands. I was a real estate broker. I knew Miami, and I was on my way home. When I came out of a blackout, the lights were flashing behind me. That'll do it. And they took me to a impound cell, a drunk take. I call myself a drunk. I don't use inebriated or intoxicated or any of that. If I was drinking, I was drunk. So they arrested me. They threw me into the cell with all these, they took everything that belonged to me. I had no shoes, I had nothing. But I was the best dressed person in the cell, remember? I was at the awards dinner. And I was drunk and sick and so humiliated. And this young girl walked over to me in the cell, and she said, "I love that dress you have on. I think I'll take it." I pointed my finger at her, and I said, "If you touch me, I will kill you." She didn't touch me. I would have fought her to the death because I was born fighting. I can say that. And what I'm going to tell you about my childhood that came out when I took the fifth step with my sponsor had nothing to do with me being an alcoholic, because I have an older sister who was not an alcoholic. She married one, and he died sober, but that's a whole nother story. My daddy was angry and physically abusive. When I was this high, I had no voice. I was not seen, I was not heard, and the person I was most afraid of lived in the house with me. I was terrified to go home. So fear, I lived with it every single day, because he would take a black belt and whip me. And if I cried, he would not stop whipping me. Where do you think all the pain went? Right down inside of me. I could not make a sound. One time I went into the bathroom, I remember, and I had French braids. I was 9 years old, and I closed the door and I pulled my braids until my head hurt because he would not allow me to speak. Now this is one of the smartest people I ever knew, and I never knew why he hurt me. I just knew sometimes my daddy hurts me. I sobered up in the last millennium, so there were no cell phones during my story or anything. So back then there were no counselors, there was nobody on my side. And my mother was verbally abusive. And I learned about abuse. The only difference between physical abuse and verbal abuse is the abuser's choice of weapons. Mine was my tongue. If I felt threatened my entire life, I could verbally decapitate you. I took no hostages, and I ate the wounded. The anger would appear. And the reason I'm telling you that, it is because alcohol, see, I can be grateful today that alcohol introduced me to the real Joyce. I had buried all that stuff. I was an imposter. I pretended that life was wonderful. I could be the life of the party. I acted happy, joyous, fake, phony. It was none of that. Somebody told me after a meeting I went to at the village chapel one night when I mentioned my anger that appeared. In fact, he said, "You know, repressed anger like you're talking about will manifest itself as rage. When you're drinking, are you raging at everybody?" I said, "I'm raging at the world." He said, "That's the real Joyce. And alcohol is her lifeline." See, I could keep her suppressed until I was drinking. So when people say alcohol changes my personality, I can honestly say that alcohol allowed my real personality to emerge. That night I left the village chapel and I drove to Pinecrest Plaza. It was pouring down rain. Remembering what he said, I sat in my car with the motor running, and I was screaming in anguish. Windshield wipers flashing back and forth. When all of that anger came out of me, and pain, it was unbelievable. I didn't know it was all there because I could hide it. I could pretend it wasn't there until I took a drink. I went home and told my husband he needed to turn off the TV, that I'd had a revelation that he didn't want to hear. I said, "You know the Joyce that emerges when she's drinking?" And I thought of myself in the third person. He said, "Yeah." I said, she's real, and she's in pain, and she's been hurt, and she needs to do something about it. And that's when I decided to get serious about taking these steps. I read all the literature, I tasted it, I chewed it, I swallowed it, I digested it. I went to big book study groups. I went to meetings after meetings and expounded all my knowledge about these steps until my sponsor said, Joyce, I have a novel idea. Why don't you take the steps? That had never occurred to me. I didn't know what she meant. I didn't choose her. I had asked 2 women to be my sponsor, and they said no. In fact, one said, no way. And one day, because they called me on my BS, the old timers, I was so full up to here. And I had to learn to listen to what was wrong with me. So this little old lady walks up to me after a meeting. I would never have asked her to be my sponsor because I couldn't imagine bellying up to the bar with Betty B. She was just too nice, you know. She was perfect for me. She listened to my BS for about a nanosecond before she could call me on it. So she kept telling me I would take the next step when I was ready. I'm not recommending this. I was 4 years in Alcoholics Anonymous on a dry drunk. I had no serenity. I had no peace in my life. It was white knuckle sobriety until I had taken the first 3 steps. Because see, I can admit something and sit on my butt. I can come to believe something sitting on my butt. And I could define the words insanity. I'm talking about that next drink, that nanosecond of insanity when I poured that drink down my throat. I had made a decision, sitting down, that I was going to turn my will, which is what I want, and my life, which is what I get, over to a God of my understanding. I'd been sober 4 years without a drink, so I knew there had to be a power that was doing that. It wasn't me. It was not me, ever. So then I was ready to take the 4th step. Terrified. Fearless. I did not want to open Pandora's box. You realize? Yeah, some of you with mythology, when they opened Pandora's box, out came the pestilence and the vermin and all of it. I didn't want anybody to know about my past because I was ashamed of it. But more than that, I was afraid of it because my entire childhood and all through until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had premeditated killing my daddy. I was homicidal when I got here. I was never suicidal. I would never kill myself. I didn't want it to be my fault, right? But I was homicidal. And so I called my brother-in-law, Bill Kay, in Houston. I said, Bill, you've known me since high school. I can't take my inventory. I had blamed everybody and everything in my life and never looked at me. I said, I'm giving you permission to take my inventory. He said, okay, get a pencil. My inventory has 3 words on it today. That's all I wrote. He said, have you ever told anybody anything that wasn't the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I said, yes. He said, number 1, write this down, liar. Number 2, have you ever taken anything that didn't belong to you? I said, yes. He said, write this down, thief. I didn't like this inventory. I hated liars and thieves. And then he said, write down cheat. I said, Bill, I've never cheated anybody out of anything. You know, I didn't cheat on an exam or anything. He said, sister-in-law, and here's the wisdom. Every drink you took, you cheated yourself out of a good self-image. That was it. That was the wisdom. And I clearly understood it. Because I had very low self-esteem, I was very successful in my business. I had a nice house. My husband is the goodest guy I have ever known. He's going to be 95 this month. He is still with me. God only knows why he lived through it. Because my drinking was like 32 years of progressive alcoholism. But I have to tell you about my sobriety date. August 21st, 1989. I've been sober longer than I was drunk, and I'm grateful for that. And this church, I must tell you, I had sunken so low, I was going to Key West, Florida. I was leaving my home. I loved Florida. I was going to drive as far south as I could go and just drink. The bars never closed in Key West. I was going to write my novel like Papa Hemingway and just sit on a bar stool the rest of my life. That's the only thing, bartenders love me. That's the only thing that made any sense. And so I packed all the clothes I could get into my car. I did not tell my husband anything. By this time, he had been living upstairs and I'd been living downstairs, except when we were eating and, making family decisions, and that suited me just fine. I was a solitary drinker. I could be in a room of 50 people drinking. I was a solitary drinker in that room. And so I was going to Key West. It was very late in the afternoon. And of course I had my vodka with me, my best friend. And I went 4 miles away from home and checked into the hotel out here on US 1. I got all the way to Aberdeen. I had been on a drunk for 2 years. 2 years I'd been drinking every day. And I could keep it kind of at a plateau, if there's anything like a plateau alcoholic, and then it would just boom, go over, So I checked into the hotel and think I'll go in the morning. That was my plan. I don't want to forget this, and I'm going to describe it exactly the way it happened. When I came to the next day, the vodka bottles were empty. I was lying in my vomit, my hair was stuck to the pillow, and my body wastes. It did not get any more disgusting than that. And as I see that today, if I had not vomited, I would have probably died, or died on my vomit. That was my spiritual state of total desperation. Total desperation. And I took a shower, I threw my clothes away, I had clothes in the car, and I drove home. I live across the street here. And I walked in and my husband was there. Everybody's looking for you. Your mother's called 3 times today. And I said, leave me alone. And I went back to my bedroom, I closed the door, and I was looking through the Venetian blinds. Now, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church with my God-fearing Southern Baptist mother. I wanted nothing to do with that God. I had physically abusive earthly father, and I learned about a physically abusive heavenly father. This God nailed his only begotten son to a cross on purpose. I mean no disrespect in a Baptist church saying that, but that didn't work for me. My mother kept telling me I was going to hell. I was going to hell. And I was thinking, I learned from the preacher that Jesus died for all my sins, and I'm forgiven. I'm not going to hell. I always had some question about heaven. God had a lot of answering to do. So religion did not work for me. It doesn't work for me today, but I do have a God of my understanding, okay? I called AA meetings my GPS, my greater power source. I have to plug into the power in order to stay sober. It's that simple. So I was looking through the Venetian blinds, And the first time in my adult life, I remember saying out loud with all the earnestness at my command, it was a plead, God, help me, please, help me. And I had a thought. I knew I was part of Southern Pines Business Association, so I knew there were some psychiatrists downtown, Dr. Flory. So my decision was to walk out my front door and walk downtown 2 blocks and commit myself to a mental institution. That was my plan, because I knew I was insane, that my life was insane. I did not go downtown to the psychiatrist. I walked through that front door into this church. Now, what I'm going to tell you was not my plan. I asked to speak to the minister, Reverend John Stone, my husband's family's minister, not mine. It was a Monday, and John was here. Chances, what are those chances? And I said, John, I need to talk to you. Now, I'm serious when I say I don't remember what I said to him, but I was weeping. I was weeping uncontrollably. And he knelt down in front of me. I was sitting down and put my hand in his and wanted to pray for me. I cursed his God right here in this church and told him, I'm not worth your prayers. You can forget your God helping me with anything. Denial. I was in total denial. And then Reverend Stone said something I did not understand. He said, Joyce, I found this unbelievable today. I think you should go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's a meeting tonight in my church. What? The Baptist church? They don't even dance. I can't imagine anybody coming here that was drinking. I was in total denial. I don't remember saying anything about alcohol, but I understand today I was reeking. I was reeking from every pore with alcohol. So I went to my office. I didn't promise him anything. I went to my office to dig my way out of whatever. I was a commissioned sales, so if I sold something, I got paid. So if I sold something, I could party and drink and whatever. It's a perfect job for a drunk. The phone rang. There was a voice on the phone that said this. I remember every word. My name is Susan. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'll be at the meeting tonight at 8 o'clock to welcome you. Perhaps you're one of us. I'll never forget that. Perhaps you're one of us. I didn't promise her anything. And that night, I walked out of my front door. You know this green area out here where there's parking now? There was a wooden sanctuary there that they were raising. The AA meeting was in there. It was a beautiful, like a chapel kind of thing. And I went in and books piled everywhere and chairs because they were getting ready to move out. And over in the corner were these people. There were maybe 8 or 10 of them sitting in a circle. And I just walked in. And there was Carl S. I wondered what happened to him. And he came over and gave me a hug. He said, I knew there was something about you I liked. And I felt better. But I remember they wanted me to introduce myself. And I did. And I told them that a Baptist minister had invited me to that meeting. Think about that. I was invited to my first AA meeting. And they passed a book around, 3rd edition of the big book. And they were writing their names and their phone numbers. And they gave it to me and said, we're here to help you. After that meeting, I stood out on that sidewalk, and a fellow named Jim B. All of these people, except one, Jenny D. from Vass, have passed on to the big meeting, as we say. And a fellow named Jim B. looked at me, and he said, Joyce, You don't have to stop drinking forever. You just have to go 24 hours without a drink, and we're going to help you. Can you do that? And I couldn't promise him that I could. I needed a drink, and I knew where the booze was, at home. I really needed a drink. I started weeping, and he handed me the key to the church and said, I want you to come back next Monday, and at 7 o'clock, I'm going to show you how to make the coffee. I didn't promise him anything. After that, it's 9 o'clock, right after the meeting. I didn't want to go home. And I went in and called my brother-in-law, Bill Kay, in Houston. He's the only person I knew that was going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, Bill, I just went to an AA meeting, and I need a drink, desperately. Now, at the time, the police station was on the corner of East New York and Broad. Then he knew, he'd visited here. And he said, sister-in-law, this is what I want you to do when you hang up the phone. I want you to go down to the police station and ask for the sergeant in charge. And when he approaches you, I want you to kick him in the groin as hard as you can. He said, you will go 24 hours without a drink. I'm crying, I'm laughing, I'm doing whatever. I didn't do that. You know I didn't do that. But I went into the park, and it was 9 o'clock at night until midnight. I was swinging, because I didn't want to go home. That's where the booze was. That meeting, I haven't had a drink since. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Susan. She said, I have somewhere I want you to take me tonight to a meeting in Aberdeen. Pick me up. Some of you knew Susan O., her husband John O. Both were in recovery. So I picked her up, and I wasn't comfortable in this church because I thought I would burst into flames if I stayed here. But she took me to Aberdeen, and I felt more comfortable there. And I didn't know at the time that Susan had an inoperable cancer, and she died 6 weeks later. I was too sick to go to her funeral. I couldn't handle it. But when she was dying and knew it, she was carrying the message to this drunk. Think about that. As sick as she was still carrying the message. So I have been to many meetings, conferences. I've had God sightings, and I could go on and on about that, but I won't. After Bill had taken my searching and fearless inventory, I told my sponsor, I'm ready to take the fifth step, and I drove out to her home in Foxfire, all the way thinking she's not going to be able to handle this. This is going to blow her doors off, because I was ready. Trust God, clean house. At this time, God was like group of drunks, G-O-D, good orderly direction. I had not had a one-on-one with my God yet. So I went to her house, and she said this, tell me about yourself. And I said, well, I had my first drink of vodka when I was 17. She said, I didn't ask you that. Tell me your earliest memory. Well, that's when it all came out about the child abuse. That's when it all came out about me being homicidal. All of it. Every character defect I could possibly. I learned that being critical and judgmental are character defects. My normal family was fighting physically. I didn't know what normal was. I didn't know what love was. Does that sound? I knew passion, but I could not define love. I could out-nice the next person. I knew how to get you to like me, but I was sick, spiritually broken to the point that when it all came out, I spent all afternoon with her. I did not leave a stone unturned. Out it came. And when I got through, she said, "Is that it?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then are you ready to have your God remove it?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I want you to go into the living room." She handed me the big book. At this time, it was like the 4th edition. She said, "I want you to turn to page 76. I call it the Spirit of 76 because that's where the 7th step prayer is." She said, "I want you to get on your knees in my living room and read that prayer aloud." She said, "I'm going to the kitchen. I want to hear you reading it." So, the 7th step prayer. I was taking the 5th, 6th, and 7th step with her without even knowing it. And when I read that prayer aloud, page 76, you can read it tonight, and I know you will. I didn't own all that stuff anymore. My past didn't hurt me anymore. Why? Because I don't live there anymore. It's amazing how that worked. She wasn't a psychiatrist or a psychologist, she was simply another recovering alcoholic who was helping me to name my garbage and to admit I could not remove what I did not acknowledge. So, having taken that 4th step, I was ready to uncover, to discover the truth about myself in order to discuss it with another human being, in order to discard it. And that's what worked for me. It's amazing. I don't work these steps. I take these steps and it works me. That's my reality. So then she said, "Are you ready?" I took the 7th step, right? The 8th step, make a list of people you've harmed. Well, that would be my family. I took a mental list, and I was ready to make amends to them, and she gave me the words. She said, "Joyce, it's not an apology. You don't tell people you're sorry. They're sick of hearing it. They're not going to believe you. It's an amends." And I had to write this down. So I went to the person for whom I had the worst resentment. And the big book, chapter 5, says, "From a resentment stem all forms of spiritual dis-ease." So I went to my daddy. It was Christmas. And I held him by the shoulders. And I said, "Papa," he was a grandfather at this time, "these are the words. If or when I have ever said or done anything to hurt you, I was wrong. You see, I was always defending my mother from him. I was staying, doesn't matter. I was threatened one time to throw him off of the 5-story balcony of a hotel if he said one more word to my mother, and he didn't. He was 84, so I thought I could take him, right? But, and he said, "Me too." I said, "I love you," to my daddy, because my sponsor helped me to understand that somebody did a number on my daddy. There were 10 kids in his tobacco farm family. Somebody hurt him. People who've been hurt will hurt people. I know that. I'm one of them. Not today. So I did that with my family members and several friends and a couple of friends I haven't found yet, to just say, if I ever said or did anything to hurt you, I was wrong. It's wrong to say anything to hurt anybody on purpose. And I was so good at it. So having taken that step, I continue to take personal inventory today. I have to give credit to people like old Mac B. This is an old Sergeant Army guy and he was a straight shooter, and he did not put up with my BS 5 seconds and called me on all of it. The first time I stood at a podium in Aberdeen and told my story, Mac B came up to me afterwards and he said, "I think you're getting better." I said, "How can you tell?" He said, "Your BS tank's about a quart low." Another guy came up to me I'd never seen before and said, "You like the sound of your voice, don't you?" How can they say these things to me? They hurt my feelings. And I want to say to every recovering alcoholic in this room tonight, I'm not afraid to hurt your feelings. They did not coddle me. They would have killed me if they had. I had to be willing to hear what I did not want to hear about me. And they let me know. In fact, one guy came up and said, "I got a pity pot in the trunk of my car. If you want to just sit on it for the next 3 days. We're tired of hearing about your husband. When are you going to talk about your real problem?" I said, "What would that be?" And here it is. Joyce, when you're looking in the mirror, you are face to face with your problem. Alcohol was never my problem. Alcohol was just my drug of choice, right? I see today, my sponsor suggested that I go home and look at myself in the mirror. Now, every morning I put on my makeup, I'm dressing, I'm looking in the mirror, right? No, I had never looked eyeball to eyeball at myself. But I did it because she suggested I do it. I remember standing there looking deeply into my eyes, and I was weeping uncontrollably. The tears were falling into the lavatory when I came to understand that nobody ever in my life treated me as badly as I treated myself. And I'm going to mention a couple of celebrities. Whitney Houston sang a lyric, "Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all." Whitney never learned. She self-destructed. Michael Jackson, "The Man in the Mirror." The lyric, and I'm going to paraphrase, is something like, "If you want your world to be a better place, look at yourself and make that change." I had to be the change. I couldn't change me. I had to become changeable, and I became changeable when I started to listen. I'm hearing impaired today. I told someone before the meeting, if you say something to me and I don't respond, either I didn't hear you or I don't like you. But when I got here, I was listening impaired. I self-detoxed in Aberdeen. I came into the meeting every night. I couldn't stop moving. Have you seen people in meetings moving? I couldn't stop moving. I could not live in my skin. I felt as if I was going to tear the flesh from my bones because I needed a drink. I'm going off on a tangent, but one time, because of that need, someone said there are 3 stages of alcoholism. I live to drink, I drink to live, I drink to die. I experienced them all. When I was a young drinker, I worked hardy, I partied harder, I lived to drink. There came a time when I could not keep my food down without a drink. I could not. I wasn't retching when I was drinking. I was retching when I wasn't. I went to the hospital on Chapel Hill. I had every tube, every test known to mankind. I told them, when I take a couple of hits of vodka, I think they call them shots today or something, I said I could keep my food down. They ignored that. They diagnosed a nervous stomach and put me on 3 tranquilizers a day. They prescribed a depressant pill. I was drinking a depressant. It almost killed me. So what did I do? I gave up tranquilizers. right? They'd never listened. The medical association treated my symptoms. I had antidepressant pills. I had anti-anxiety pills, pills for a nervous stomach. I take no pills today, a vitamin D. I don't have any of those symptoms anymore. But if you do, and I understand, that you need pills, I have no problem with that, whatever your doctor thinks. But the American Medical Association, I wish I had brought the Living Sober book. Do you have that book here in your meeting, Living Sober? It's yellow. See, nobody in here ever taught me how to stop drinking. I don't think you know how, because I don't, if I pick it up. They teach me how to live sober. Didn't have a clue how to do that. The first page of the Living Sober book, the American Medical Association made this statement. The primary treatment for alcoholism involves not taking the first drink. How about that one? They know they can't cure us. They know they can't treat us. What treats me today? You do. All I need is another recovering alcoholic or a drunk and a cup of coffee, and I can have a meeting. I might not go to a meeting every day, but I talk to someone in recovery every day because I need help. I need help every day. I met a young fellow over here named Noah. Noah? Jonah. Almost. I'm old, I play the age card. And he's kind of a newcomer. I got purses older than this kid. And I told him, I said, I'm a newcomer. And I said, I haven't had a drink since August 21st, 1989. Keep coming back until you understand that. One day at a time. If it's a new day, I am a newcomer in a day. It's that simple. Because I was physically ill recently, and the first thing I thought about, even said to my husband, a hot toddy would really help me. If you don't know what that is, that's whiskey, lemon juice, and what else? Honey, I think it is. It's been so long, can't remember. But I still think about it. I'm still powerless over the thought of taking a drink. I don't think it will ever leave me alone or let me go, and that's okay. I don't have to take it, and I didn't take the hot toddy. But I read something recently, and this really impressed me, and I know how much you love to be read to. But it was a psychiatrist, I'm a reader, a fellow named James Knight, who calls us wounded healers. And he made a statement. The effectiveness of AA members in the care and treatment of their fellow alcoholics is one of the greatest success stories of our time. It illustrates the power of wounds to lighten the burden of pain and suffering for other alcoholics. I have always said, 1935, when Alcoholics Anonymous founded, 5 years before I was born, it is the greatest spiritual movement of the 20th century. We're spiritual beings. We're wounded healers. I believe that because the path, again, doesn't haunt me today. I don't use anything or anybody as my excuse to pick up that next drink. Because if I do, I cannot stop abruptly. So, I know you need 5 minutes to close the meeting, so it's time to get the flock out of here. So I'm done.